Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Astrid Garcia-Ochoa, Deputy Director for Future of California Elections, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our Funding Democracy, the Future of Sustainable Election Funding and Governance webinar. I want to thank the James Irvine Foundation for supporting the work of Future of California Elections. We are a collaboration of election officials, reform advocates, civil rights groups, and community organizations. Very much like our audience today, we have a diverse audience. We had over 100 registrants for this event, so currently your lines are muted, but we will unmute them when we get to the Q&A portion. And in our audience today, we do indeed have election officials, nonprofit organizations, advocates, and even members of the media. So thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us. I'm going to pass it over to our moderator, Ofelia Medina. She is the Director of State Civic Engagement Policy for the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, Educational Fund. Thank you, Ofelia.
Thank you, Astrid. Good morning, everyone, and again, welcome to the Funding Democracy, the Future Sustainable Election Funding and Governance webinar. Before we get started, we do have 4 amazing speakers this morning. Those speakers include Ms. Kim Alexander from the California Voter Foundation, Ms. Kathy Darlene Allen from Shasta County, Ms. Caitlin Maple from California Forward, and Ms. Pamela Smith from Verified Voting. Again, we do have time at the end for question and answer, so make sure that you're raising your hands once we get to that point. And we're going to get started with our first speaker, Ms. Kim Alexander. Kim serves as the president and founder of the California Voter Foundation, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to improving the voting process to better serve voters. The California Voter Foundation is a longtime leader in advancing responsible use of technology in the democratic process, pioneering online voter education and campaign finance disclosure and transparency and auditing requirements for computerized voting systems. Again, thank you so much, Kim, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ofelia. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay, and if not, you'll let me know. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to talk about our topic and give a basic overview of where we're at in California when it comes to funding elections. So next slide, please. So who pays for California elections? You know, we know a lot about the contributors and costs of political campaigns, but very little is actually known or well understood about how the election process itself is funded. The costs of administering elections in California, costs such as printing ballots, hiring, training, and paying poll workers, printing and mailing ballot and ballot pamphlets out to voters, which is happening this week, tabulating the votes and verifying the results. All of those are covered primarily by local government. County governments facilitate elections for federal, state, and most local contests, and cities in California either administer their own elections or they reimburse counties for the cost of administering these elections. Unlike cities, other levels of government do not reimburse counties for the cost of facilitating their elections, although federal and state offices take up a considerable amount of real estate on the ballot, but they don't pay contribute any direct funds toward the cost of elections. Next slide, please. But we shouldn't overlook the fact that at the state level and the federal level, there are many government agencies that play an important role in the election process. For example, the Attorney General is very involved in the initiative process and also defending our election laws. The Fair Political Practices Commission is responsible for overseeing campaign finance disclosure and enforcement. The Secretary of State has a lot of responsibilities, certifying voting equipment, overseeing the statewide voter registration database, publishing and distributing the voter information guide, and compiling certified election results, and much, much more that I can't go on to list all here. And we'll go on to the next slide. And some of the things that the federal government is doing to help with the election process include the Federal Election Commission's role in campaign disclosure for candidates for federal office. The Election Assistance Commission provides oversight and research for the entire elections community and for voters, and also has an important role in developing and maintaining federal voting system standards. And the U.S. Attorney General and Department of Justice are responsible for enforcing federal voting rights laws. Next slide, please. So although there are not ongoing costs being paid by the state or federal government to local governments for the cost of elections, there have been a couple of examples recently where some direct costs have been provided, some direct funds have been provided for election programs. most notably in 2002 with the enactment of the Federal Help America Vote Act. California received $195 million to replace punch card voting systems, and also received some money to provide outreach and voter education for voters to help with the new equipment. So that was a one-time expenditure. That same year we saw the passage of Proposition 41, which the legislature placed on the ballot. That provided $200 million to California counties to support purchasing new voting equipment. So back in 2002, following the Florida voting problems, we had a real boom time in voting equipment in California, where there was suddenly a lot of money made available to counties on a one-time basis to modernize voting equipment. In 2007, we saw the passage of SB 113. This is something that's been a little bit in the news lately when people ask why aren't we having an early presidential primary. We tried that actually in 2008. And it ended up costing over $80 million for the state to reimburse the counties the cost of having an extra primary that year. So that was one of the recent direct expenses. And there's one more I'm going to talk about a little bit later that just happened just in the past week. So next slide, please. So now let's talk about what is a state-mandated local program. When the state passes a law that requires all local governments to do something, it's called a state-mandated local program. And since 1979, the California Constitution has required the state to reimburse local governments for any costs resulting from implementing new programs required under state law. So state mandates that existed in law prior to 1979, such as requiring one polling place per 1,000 voters, and there are many more in the Elections Code that govern the election process, these are not subject to reimbursement. So we have this odd mix of laws in the state, most of which pre-exist the mandate law, and counties are required to do under state law and receive no reimbursement for them, and other more recent laws that have been more recently enacted since 1979 and do fall under this constitutional requirement that they be reimbursed, the counties be reimbursed the costs of implementing those programs. So next slide, please. So in the election field, we talk about what are the state-mandated local election programs. I know that's a mouthful. You get used to saying it after a while. Over the years, there have been a number of laws that have been enacted that trigger reimbursements, and the most significant of these are changes that have widely expanded the right of California voters to vote by mail. It used to be that you had to request a ballot for every election, and then we changed it to allow people to be a permanent vote-by-mail voter. And it used to be that you had to have an excuse for voting by mail, and we changed it to no excuse. You could just vote that way if that's what was most convenient for you. So we've made it, given voters many more options, and those options were provided to voters after the constitutional requirements, so they were subject to reimbursement through the state mandate program. And another recent law that I want to highlight is one that requires counties to verify signatures on provisional ballot envelopes. So there's a handful, there's about 6 mandates that are in the election field that are still active, but the ones pertaining to voting by mail programs and also this provisional ballot envelopes signature verification are some of the more expensive ones. And 2015 Department of Finance report found that the unpaid claims for activities relating to mail-in ballots represents 86% of the almost $119 million due for all election mandates. So next slide, please. So why are we not funding election mandates? The reason is because in 2011, when the state was facing a significant budget shortfall, Governor Jerry Brown proposed and the state legislature approved suspending funding for the election mandates in order to save costs. And as a result of doing that, the laws that prompted the mandates in the first place were converted from required to permissive. So that means that technically any county that wishes to can stop allowing voters to sign up as permanent vote-by-mail voters and can also refrain from verifying the signatures of voters who cast provisional ballots. So these potential changes in voter access and ballot security are of a concern to many, especially people who want to see voters enjoy equal protection, but it also could result in challenges to election results where candidates who are running in multiple counties have voters being treated differently in those counties, and that could result in litigation For example, if one county is checking provisional ballot envelope signatures and another isn't, then a candidate who's in a contest that covers both those counties could raise a legal challenge to those election results. Next slide, please. So what would it cost to restart the election mandates? Well, we kind of hoped after Prop 30 passed that we would see the mandate funding restored, but that didn't happen, and we've now in five budget cycles in with this suspension. Some of the millions that are owed to counties from pre-2004 reimbursement claims are being paid through prior budget agreements. So that $119 million on the previous slide that you saw, a chunk of that is being paid back through other changes in the law and budget agreements. But there's still another 76 million that is needed to restart the election mandates funding process. And just recently on April 28th, the Senate's Budget Subcommittee number 4, chaired by Senator Richard Ross, voted unanimously to take the election mandates off the suspended mandates list and to add $76 million to the budget to instead fund them. So that's a little bit of good news that we just had recently on this issue. Next slide. So what is the consequence to the voters? Increasingly we see election laws enacted by the state legislature are permissive and not required. This gives counties the option to provide certain services and programs, but not requiring them to do so. And some examples of this, AB 477, which is a bill that California Voter Foundation supported, authored by Kevin Mullen, requires counties to accept signatures from voters who forget to sign their vote-by-mail ballot envelopes, which is one of the leading reasons why so many vote-by-mail ballots are rejected in California, because the voters forget to sign the envelope. So we got a new law enacted that says that voters are entitled to submit their signatures after the fact and have it attached to their ballot and have their ballot get counted. But the law does not require counties to contact voters in the first place to tell them if their signature is missing. We knew that if we had drafted the bill in that way, that it likely would not have been signed by the governor, because the governor doesn't like to create new mandates. So this was the best we could do, and create a situation where counties that want to do that outreach can do that outreach to help voters correct their ballot mistakes, but they're not obligated to do it, which means that not all voters are going to have equal treatment. Another recent law that was enacted allows counties to accept vote-by-mail ballot applications over the phone, but it doesn't require them to do that. So it makes it difficult for voters to know exactly what rights and opportunities they have, because they can vary from county to county and are not treated equally statewide. And another area where we see a lot of variety is in voter lookup tools, where it tends to be wealthier coastal counties that offer more online services for voters to help them check their registration status and see their sample ballot and their vote-by-mail ballot status. Next slide, please. So will funding for election mandates be restored? I hate to sound pessimistic, but I do think it's doubtful. We have seen the State Senate for 2 years in a row adding funding back into the budget for election mandates, but it's been removed in the final version approved by the Budget Conference Committee. And as I mentioned before, the governor is not a fan of the mandates reimbursement process. But there is a little glimmer of hope on the horizon. We just saw a week and a half ago, AB 120 was enacted and signed into law. It added to the 2015-16 state budget a $16.3 million appropriation to help counties cover extra 2016 election costs. The Secretary of State led this effort. He recognized that the counties were going to have a lot of difficulty trying to verify lots of initiative petition signatures while they were simultaneously preparing for the June 7th primary. And he acted quickly to get this proposal together and make this request. And his full request was for $32 million. He's asked for additional funding for the state voter guide for fall, and the portion that was awarded in this bill covers the addition to the 2015-16 budget. Whether additional funds will be added to the 2016-17 budget to help pay for extra voter guide costs, which includes design improvements and better layout and use of color that make the guide more user-friendly. Remains to be seen whether the legislature wants to pay those kinds of costs too, and we'll find out when the budget is approved in June. Next slide, please. So other funding approaches to consider. Since the mandates is not a popular process, we could look at placing funding in the Secretary of State's budget to distribute to counties, and that's in fact how AB 120 is working and how Prop 141 worked and Prop 41 worked. We could create a block grant to allocate state funds to local jurisdictions based on need with local oversight and accountability, similar to what we saw developed through the local control funding formula model. Or we might look at this ballot real estate model, having counties be able to charge the state for its portion of election costs. And just in one example we looked at in Shasta County 2014, the state costs amounted to approximately 1/4 of the county's overall election costs. So just to give you an idea of what that would mean percentage-wise on a county's ballot and on their budget. Next slide, please. So just in conclusion, I just want to emphasize that voter education, voter engagement, ballot design improvements, online access to election information and tools, these are all things many people on this call are working towards, and they're not going to happen without sufficient funding to pay for them. And it's important for our political leaders and the elections community in California to work together to ensure the resources that counties need in order to give all voters equal and excellent voting opportunities and services are provided. And after many years working in elections, I've come to realize that this issue of election funding is really one of the root issues that needs attention, and I look forward to continuing working with many of you on the call on this issue moving forward. Last slide, please. And there's my contact information if you'd like to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Yeah.
And our next speaker is Ms. Kathy Darlene Allen. Kathy has served as the elected Shasta County Clerk and Register of Voters since 2004. In her role, she has overseen the administration of over 20 elections and has counted more than 850,000 votes using electronic voting and paper ballot voting. Kathy is an active member of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials, serving on the Elections Legislative Committee, the Board of Directors, and as past president. Again, thank you so much, Kathy, and welcome.
Thank you, Ophelia. So if you want to go ahead and start the PowerPoint. I'm going to talk this morning about a grant project that the Irvine Foundation funded, and I'm sorry, my CACEO logo is on top of half of my text there. We worked with our contractor, Q2 Data and Research, which is headed up by Karen McDonald, and a bunch of other great team members to get this project going. If you can go to the next slide, please. Our goal was to collect actual election costs for the state of California from each of the counties for a 10-year period, beginning in 2004 and ending with the November election in 2014, which was a Herculean task I don't think we quite comprehended when we began this journey. So Irvine funded our grant request in late 2013, and it took us several months to find the right person to do this job, and so we started data collection in 2014, of course in the middle of an election year. So counties were very busy conducting elections and not so excited about us knocking on their door asking for costs at that point. And we had one thing to do before we could start collecting the data, which was to develop a survey tool, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. So we did data collection and analysis and website development throughout 2015, and we launched the website just last month in April. This was originally an 18-month grant, and we really appreciate the flexibility and the very generous support of the Irvine Foundation to allow us to take the time we needed to collect all of the data involved. Next slide, please. So, of course, we have 58 counties in California, but we were not successful in getting every single one of them to participate in this project. We are going forward, and we hope to add more counties to our roster as we collect costs for this current fiscal year, or calendar year, I should say. So we had the participation of 47 counties over 15 elections. That includes the primary and general for each of the even years. And also we collected information for a statewide special election in May of 19, and then of course in 2008 we had 3 elections, if you recall, the presidential primary in February, and then the regular primary in June, and the November presidential election. So this all combines to result in a database with almost 120,000 individual data elements. We collected information not only about election costs, but also demographics of every election. So how many votes were cast, what kind of voting system was used, and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this again some more later, but we wanted to try and come up with ways to look at why there were differences in costs in different counties. And of course, languages is one of the primary kind of things that causes a higher level of complexity in some counties versus others. We have counties that support over 10 languages and some that only support 1. Jurisdictional complexity, of course, Los Angeles is everybody's favorite example. I think they have 88 incorporated cities. My county, which is on the kind of other end of the spectrum, has 3. So of course that is obviously a great variety across the state of California. And then local economic factors were something also that we looked at. Additionally, size obviously is one of those things that we have a great variety of in California. And also vote by mail rates are very different. We have counties that are in the 70s percentile of people who choose to vote by mail, and then other counties that are very large that have much lower rates. And then the technology mix for each county is almost every county has a unique situation in one way or another. Next slide, please. So the website, this is the URL for the results website for the data that we've collected. I just wanted to make sure folks knew where to go and find this information. And I'm going to just go through some slides pretty quickly of what the website looks like. We really want to invite folks to go there, explore, see what you can find. The thing that we are really excited about with this data set is the fact that it shines a little bit of light on something that was previously really kind of a secret squirrel piece of knowledge. Although of course it's all public information, it has not ever been aggregated before from counties. So we're really excited to have this be available for not only for counties to look at, because it's very educational for us to educate ourselves, but also for other stakeholders and the legislature, et cetera. So on the website, there's a map I'm going to show you in just a second, which displays which counties are in the data set that you're looking at. You can choose the elections you want to look at, and then there's several different ways to see those results in a chart formats. Next slide. So this is the home page when you land, and you can go to the next slide. And when you scroll down, and you can see here on the left under elections, I've checked the boxes for the 2014 elections that were statewide. And there is some data displayed for you. We've grouped counties by population. And you can look either at total population or weighted density. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And when you scroll down on this same page, you also can see cost distributions by the county population. If you look on the right-hand side towards the bottom, you see there's a cost breakdown. This chart is displaying the overall cost, but you can also check those other radio buttons and look at individual cost levels. Go ahead to the next slide. So you can see here I've just moused over. I've also changed the options. I've clicked on ballot printing only for this particular screen, and then clicked on total population, which changes those blue bars in the background of this particular chart. Instead of looking at that weighted density, we're looking at, you can see LA all the way on the right-hand side, right, of course. And then I've moused over my own county to show you as an example that those points on the chart all have individual and discrete data elements that you can explore. Go ahead to the next slide. So at the top of the nav bar on the website, previously we were looking at the county level cost. And when you go up to the top and click on costs over time, this is the chart that you would see. And in this, you can see along the bottom here, I've added some check boxes to those elections we picked on the first page. And so we're looking now at both of the general and primary elections from 12 and 14 to give us a date range to look at over time. And here is ballot printing for the entire state in that purple bar. And you can see, as I purposely did this screen grab with the mouse over, so you can see that each one of those data points also gives you a little bit of extra information in addition to the graph itself. Go ahead. This same page, I'm just scrolling down the page. So this is a screenshot about ballot complexity to let you know how many individual candidates, measures that were on the ballot, and then the different kinds of ballots that those things result in depending on where folks live, right? Go ahead to the next slide. And then scrolling all the way to the bottom of that page, you have voting methods, which gives us a little very clear overview of people voting at home and people voting at polling places. Go ahead to the next slide. So there again, there is the URL for the website. We'd love to have people take a look at this information. Can we go back one or two slides? I'm sorry. I want to just, oh, that's fine. There's an About button there at the top, and in that About page, and I didn't do a screenshot from this part of the website, but if you go to the About page, there are some data analyses there that are really interesting to explore. You can also download the whole data set if you want to and do some analysis of your own, although that may or may not be something that folks want to do, but we may have some statisticians around who want to play with stuff. So go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm sorry. I just wanted to point that out. So this is our last slide. So again, the data analysis is on that About page. We also have produced, as a result of this grant, a billing practices guide that is complete, and we're going to be distributing that among CACEO members. If there's other folks who are interested, we'll be happy to share it as well. It breaks down different billing methodologies used by counties when they bill out jurisdictions. One of the things that I'm really excited about in this process, and I think one of the most profound changes we're going to see within the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials, is the permission to go ahead and develop this Fiscal Services Committee, which we had in the past an SB 90 committee, which of course has had kind of a bizarre trickle out because of the suspension of the state mandates that Kim was just talking about. But we are really looking forward to the opportunity to gather the people from each one of our counties who do this work and collect and aggregate election cost data and do the fiscal work in each county elections department. Typically, those folks don't have any peers in their county. I know in my department and my county, we have one person who does election cost activities, and she has no peers. No one else in this county does that work except her. So we're really looking forward to continuing what we were able to do last year and in 2014, which is to bring those folks together for some information sharing and training opportunities for those folks. And we are anticipating that having a kickoff meeting in July at our annual conference coming up. So I think I'm going to leave it at that and let other folks take some time, and then I'll be happy to answer questions during the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And our next speaker is Ms. Caitlin Maple. Caitlin serves as the research analyst working on California Forward's election funding project. This year-long project aims to assess how elections are funded in other states, as well as in California's 58 counties, in order to discover more equitable and sustainable election funding models. In addition to conducting research, she is also responsible for writing election-related media content and briefing organizations, policymakers, and other interested parties on the project. Welcome, Caitlin.
Hi, thank you, and good morning. I'm always really lucky to follow Kim Alexander and Kathy Darling Allen because they make my job easy. So I'm going to actually breeze through a lot of it, knowing that we're running a little bit behind on time. So amid the current impasse over backlogged election mandate reimbursements and building tensions between state and local governments, California Forward was tasked with the goal of looking beyond the mandate system to discover how other states fund elections, how California's counties fund elections, and what alternative models exist that can more adequately, reliably, and sustainably fund elections in California. So the next slide, please. So in order to understand the historical context, we asked counties which factors led to the current impasse. We found that some of the key points were the creation of state mandates with SB 90, which required counties to perform certain functions, Prop 13, which restricted counties' ability to produce revenue, and eventually Prop 1A, which allowed the state to suspend reimbursements to counties for mandates and really aided in the current tension. And next slide. We found that the inability of counties to collect local property tax revenue along with unfunded election mandates really led to this tension between state and local governments. And this has created a funding framework that isn't working well and leaves elections underfunded. And the next slide, please. So we began the project by collecting budget data and survey feedback from states across the nation and within California's counties. Our goal was to understand how elections are funded and operated in other states and how that information can be used as a framework to develop potential funding options to more adequately and sustainably fund elections. Maybe next slide. So we started by looking at other states. We sent surveys out to all 50 states and received 27 responses. These surveys help to develop a general understanding of how election administration and funding is shared among states and their local governments. And this is what we found. That about 70% of these states share funding and responsibilities between their local, state and local governments. And that there are really formal divisions between them. That's usually informal agreements between the state and local governments on what they're going to do. So for exploratory purposes, we grouped these into 3 models, which was a centralized, a decentralized, and a hybrid model. The next slide, please. So the more centralized states have uniform statewide voting systems and financial responsibility primarily at the state level. 2 examples of interest include New Mexico, where the state purchases all supplies and ballots and purchases voting systems through a voting system revolving fund created by the legislature. And Georgia, where the state purchased voting system and funds the Center for Election Systems through their largest university, which builds ballots and collects data. Now, next slide, please. The more decentralized models are very similar to California, in which the local governments choose and purchase voting equipment that is certified by the state, and the majority of the decisions are made at the local level. In these models, counties seek reimbursement for the cost of election services from local jurisdictions using various methodologies and formulas. The next slide. And the last group is a hybrid model that encompasses about 70% of responding states. Funding and responsibility are shared between the state and local governments and their jurisdictions. These include a determined fair share between the entities. A few examples include Colorado, which pays 90 cents per active voter, meaning a voter that actually is registered and goes out and votes, in counties with less than 10,000 voters, and 80 cents with more than 10,000 voters. There's Louisiana, which pays 75% of total election costs at the state level and divides the remaining 25% between their localities. And Arizona, which reimburses at a flat rate of $1.25 per registered voter. And then Minnesota, which Kim Alexander mentioned previously, which charges by the amount of actual ballot real estate that it takes up or the space on the ballot. And the next slide. So the survey also asked election officials if there were examples of collaboration to reduce costs or increase efficiency. We found that there were some that shared costs of procuring voting equipment and supplies, but most did not have really concrete examples of collaboration. The next slide. So we also asked qualitative questions of state election officials to see what challenges and potential solutions the state had. And here were some thoughts. Some common themes included determining the fair share of costs can be difficult. Understanding what actual costs are is difficult. Difficult to determine due to inconsistent data collection and reporting. Outdated laws and statutes and the need for legislative action to update them are also challenges. Some of their self-reported potential solutions included finding reliable funding, reducing budgetary restrictions, developing alternative funding mechanisms, and adopting uniform voting systems. The next slide. We then needed to find out what counties in California were doing. In a survey to all 58, we had 33 responses. Some general points of agreement are about 96% agree that California should adopt a different funding framework for elections. 88% agree that counties should collaborate more and share resources to take advantage of economies of scale. 76% self-reported needing to replace voting systems within 3 to 4 years. And 81% are interested in exploring alternative funding mechanisms for elections. The next slide. We also asked counties how counties determine what to charge local jurisdictions for the cost of election services, and found that that varies from county to county, with most charging based upon the number of measures of candidates, registered voters, jurisdictions, or polling places. We did not delve very deep into this particular aspect of the study because the CACEO study was creating a database for that. So next slide. As we did with states, we also asked qualitative questions to counties. They indicated their funding challenges included adopting new laws and regulations, complying with mandates, purchasing voting systems, and by far the most costly aspect being putting on special elections. There were also an overwhelming number of counties that indicated that they were waiting on the outcome of SB 450 before determining how to move forward on purchasing equipment or changing practices. The next slide. So this is always my favorite slide because after hosting 3-hour-long convenings with registrars around the state, no matter what region we were in, every item on this list had been discussed at some point, and it was sort of an aha moment. So we asked how the state could be helpful beyond just funding, and registrars indicated that streamlined certification processes, updating law and statute for new technology, consulting and collaborating with counties on new laws and regulations, flexible and timely regulation adoption, pilot project authorization, and policies to expand the market of available products for all, ways that the state could be helpful beyond just providing funding. The next slide. We found that despite a lack of extensive collaboration within California, counties were really interested in collaborating if the benefits were clear. So here, if there were, oh, sorry, that's the next slide. We'll skip one over. So yeah, if the benefits were clear. So if there was improvement to outreach to poll workers, reducing the cost of printed election materials, allowing resource sharing, improving voter outreach and education, the voter experience, resulting in increased state assistance and reducing the cost of voting systems. So on the next slide. So after starting out with the goal of finding alternative funding solutions for a broken mandate process, it became clear that there are many factors that must be addressed concurrently to create long-term solutions. These include antiquated and hard-to-update technology, limited certification and procurement processes, a stalemate on determining the fair share of costs, minimal cooperation, and little incentive for continuous improvement and efficiency. Thus, the problem is fourfold, and the solution must holistically address these symptoms of a historically strained state and local relationship. So the next slide. So how do we fix it? This involves asking the right questions, and I think the most foundational of this is, what do we want elections to look like? For California Forward, the start is a pathway to modernization, which includes using technology to increase efficiency and efficacy, updating processes to allow for new technology, and developing funding mechanisms that create the right incentives. This path includes working to repair the state and local relationship by developing a fair share of costs, which may include the state paying for statewide special elections and measures, candidates, as well as incentives for continual improvement. The next. And where do we start? Our next steps include exploring ways technology can be useful by updating and streamlining selection, implementation, and maintenance processes, structuring state and local contributions to encourage results, and incentivizing counties to collaborate and continually improve. And just a last note here, we'll be releasing our report that shows our full recommendations at the end of this month and distributing out to a broad range of folks. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that, feel free to contact me. I think the next one, yeah, there's my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. So we are running a little bit behind time, so again, I appreciate everyone just taking a couple more minutes. We do have one more speaker, and then we'll have some time for a quick Q&A. Our final speaker for this morning is Ms. Pamela Smith. Pamela serves as the president of Verified Voting. She provides information and public testimony on verified voting issues at the federal and state level throughout the U.S., and she also oversees an extensive information resource on election equipment and the regulations governing its use at the federal level and across the 50 states. Thank you again, Pam, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, and thanks everyone for being here. I feel a little bit like the person that's standing between you and the drinks at the end of the conference, so I'll try and go quickly. Thanks for being election geeks. Go to the second slide if you would. Thanks. So verified voting does track what kinds and makes and models of voting systems are being used in every voting jurisdiction in the country. We have an interactive map at our website. Like most states, California counties use one of several different types of voting systems. mostly ballots and scanners in polling places with some accessible ballot marking of some kind and some vote by mail. Some states do all one type and make or model of voting system, like all the ballots and scanners in polling place are from the same vendor, like Maryland, New Mexico, or in all vote by mail states, as you can see 3 of them in stripes there with various solutions for accessible voting. That's Oregon, Washington, Colorado. This helps jurisdictions get lower cost systems and supplies provided by vendors, but it may not be the case that one size fits all counties need. Next slide, please. So America's voting systems are aging to the point where it's being described as a crisis. When the President's Commission report came out, it was with that comment, and the Brennan Center looked at that with a report that came out a few months ago. We shared some of our historical voting system data with them, and they did research, and what they found was election officials who need new equipment don't have enough funding. In at least 31 states, they told Brennan Center they wanted to get new equipment within the next few years, just like in California. Some sooner, some later. Officials from 22 out of those 31 states said they didn't know where they'd get the money to pay for it. It could be as much as $1 billion overall nationally to replace voting systems, but that figure could be reduced with good contracting, volume buying, and some of the new non-proprietary designs for voting systems like what LA is doing. There's a significant risk to voters in that there's a disparity in states where wealthier counties might be able to replace their aging and in some cases failing voting systems, and counties with fewer resources wouldn't be able to do so as readily. There's no new pot of federal money available like there was back in 2002 with the Help America Vote Act, although Congressman Hank Johnson from Georgia did just introduce a bill that would provide some replacement funding, although as we know that would probably be a long shot. Next slide, please. So you've heard about some of the things that drive the kinds of election technology costs. It's more than just a voting machine. There are many, many other pieces to the puzzle, and I won't go into detail for time here. Next slide, please. How much does all this cost? The key thing to know here is that it depends. Mostly it depends on how much you're buying. Laws can drive costs and changes too, but what kind of voting mode is also a factor. So some scanners could cost $5,000, they could cost $8,500 if you're only buying a few of them. Big scanners that are counting ballots centrally at the elections office can go between $40,000 and over $110,000. Electronic poll books might be a few $100s, or they might be over $1,500. So there's quite a bit of variability. A law that passed in Illinois was a really positive change that mandated extending the deadline to register to vote up to and including Election Day registration for jurisdictions that are over a certain size. There were 20 counties that had to do that, and it meant getting an electronic poll book system for early voting on Election Day and being able to use a system that could provide all the ballot styles they needed on demand. In one county, that ran to about just under $1 million to serve their 14 early voting sites and get enough e-poll books. Jurisdictions need a lot more flexibility than they might have in the past because they're offering different modes of voting now. You still need to be able to accommodate polling place and or vote center voters on Election Day in most cases, and there's also more need for early voting as those laws change. And you need better central count scanners where vote by mail is increasing. So the funding model is kind of evolving. Next slide. Caitlin covered a lot of the ways that states are managing costs. Here's a couple of examples here. Better contracting can really save a lot of money, especially for small counties that can least afford it. I think it's important to know that there are some unintended consequences. You can save money by reducing the number of polling places. We've seen shifts to vote by mail. One jurisdiction said their elections budget for polling equipment in 2004 was $1.9 million. In 2015, it was only $257,000. They have vote centers now, and they have mail-ins. So that's a big drop. But what's the impact on voters with disabilities when you have fewer polling places with accessible equipment to go to? In one city in Illinois, they noted that getting the ballot marking and printing system reduced the number of machines that they needed for early voting. But in order to pay for it, they reduced the number of polling places. And that shouldn't have to happen. Next slide, please. So just some of the recommendations and caveats. Be sure to support the county needs so that vendors are offering the same price per item to smaller counties as to larger ones, and also to save costs by not having to reinvent the wheel in every jurisdiction. Decoupling the ongoing maintenance from the initial purchase contract can happen too, and that's a good way to save. They do that in New York State, and it enables competitive bids for service agreements. The new models that you're seeing out of Los Angeles County, San Francisco, now looking to move to open source voting system model as well. Travis County, Texas, designing its own voting system as well, can cost considerably less for the voting system than what's available from a vendor designed system. Most of these systems would be using some commercial off-the-shelf, that's COTS, items, and that can be considerably less expensive than proprietary hardware sold by vendors. And they'll own the equipment and be in a better position to negotiate for ongoing maintenance. But how we think about new models of voting systems is important. You might be able to get lower prices with printers or tablets or other COTS products, but they might need more frequent replacement, and it means a different kind of funding stream than before. You have a voting system that's evolving over time and changes to component parts as technology changes rather than one that stays the same over its lifespan, which is what we have today. And that may be better, but it's definitely different. Next slide, please. The bottom line is fund smart. Do this in a data-driven and voter-driven way. States need to plan for the ability to support polling place voting system models on an ongoing basis. It may be possible to do a vote-by-mail, vote center, or early voting model, but it might not happen in all the counties, and you need to plan for success for any model. And counties should not be forced into vote-by-mail just because of cost if their voters are better served with a different model. States should engage with groups doing cost research to better understand and fund ongoing needs and consider the possibility that a shorter funding cycle may become necessary. States should see how best to support the county's needs, especially those with fewer resources, help negotiate more favorable agreements. And a final thought, there are systems now and entering the market that may purport to be secure, but don't really meet the quality standards that we need and that generates justifiable voter confidence. We need to ensure through smart funding that we continue to lead on testing, certifying, and deploying voting systems that really support robust elections with good audit capability, better scanning, remote accessible ballot marking that supports genuine privacy and security. If we're going to improve on voter participation, it's really critical to support voter confidence in that way. Last slide. Thanks very much, everybody, for listening. There's my contact information, too.
Thank you so much, Pam, and thank you again to all of our 4 speakers this morning. So we do have some time for some question and answers. Again, we have limited time, so if you can keep your question as brief as possible. And then also as a reminder, Astrid went ahead and explained to everyone at the beginning of the call that you should be able to raise your hand if you have a question. I know a question already came up about whether the slides will be available from our presentation. So yes, a link will be sent to everyone following the webinar, and the email will contain information and the links to all the resources shared today. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand at this moment. And I know actually, Ted,
the conference has been unmuted.
So Ted, if you're on the phone still, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Ophelia. This was a great webinar. I really enjoyed it. So my question was, way back when, before HAVA, at the kind of beginning of the process, excuse me, the disability community was able to get the GAO to do a study of access needs of voters with disabilities. And that's kind of what provoked the loosening up of the federal money for technology to be added into HAVA. And so as we're gearing up for hopefully a HAVA 2, we've been making asks of our members of Congress to find someone in each house, because that's all it takes. It doesn't even take legislation, to request a GAO study of the needs of voters with disabilities. And I assume that we could also be asking for a study of the needs of voters with language access barriers too. And we've also put in a formal request to the Election Assistance Commission. I'm just wondering if any of the advocates that are on this call have done the same, or any of the counties have done the same, and if not, if you would be willing to partner with disability advocates on an effort to make this ask and get that GAO study going, because that seems to be the key for us to loosening up the funds for accessibility and the technology.
Ted, this is Pam. I don't know if I'm muted or not. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Pam.
Great, thanks. I would be very interested in that. I think that's the kind of thing that needs, anything like that that brings attention to Congress about the need for ongoing funding for elections and really supporting the kind of democracy that we want is going to be critical. It really can't be an occasional thing. Other things take priority when budgets are tight, and especially in the state and especially in the county. So any other infrastructure need usually comes before elections. So it's really important to have something like that that draws attention.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you, Pam. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll be calling on you. And I see Hannah Joy. Go ahead.
Hi there. This is Hannah with the office of Kevin Mullen. I was just wondering. My question is for can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you, Hannah.
Okay. Related to the funding solution whereby the locals charge the state for real estate on the ballot, and I was just wondering if she could expand on that a little bit more and talk about what exactly she means by that.
Is that for?
Hi.
Oh.
That was really high-pitched noise. I'm not sure who's got their phone on. Is that for Caitlin or Kim?
Sorry, that's for Kim.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I missed that part. Hi, Hannah. Yeah, it's really kind of in the beginning stages of a proposal, and I really appreciate your, Assemblyman Mullen's, interest in this issue of election funding. We've really benefited in the elections community from the research that California Forward is doing and learning about the prevalence of that kind of model in other states, so that helps us craft a proposal for California that would take a similar approach, so we can look to other states to see what they're doing, like in Minnesota. But I think that approach holds a lot of promise. Okay. It's a long shot, but I think that is a good framework to consider. Ted, could you mute your phone, please? We can all hear you.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I would like to remind that all lines have been unmuted. So if you can go ahead and mute your line, and then if you have a question, we'll be calling on you.
My phone is not you,
Ted. I'm sorry.
It's not me.
Somebody else.
We always need help around here, especially in the summer. So we'd love to have you back.
Cool. Okay. Well, we kind of said that at the end of the summer, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and Hannah, we can talk about that some more later if you like, offline.
Also, Hannah, this is Caitlin. I just wanted to maybe clarify a little bit if you were wondering about what the actual formula for that model is. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, so what they do in Minnesota is each entity, usually the counties or whatever locality they have, they're charged by the amount of space they take up on the ballot. And the formula that I was given is they do total cost multiplied by the percentage of voters in that jurisdiction, multiplied by the percentage of total column inches on the ballot. And I can send you that information as well.
Yeah, that'd be
This will also be in the election funding report coming out at the end of this month.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I could also add real quick, I should mention that a lot of the counties already have similar formulas in place for billing cities for election costs, so it would not be that hard. They're not necessarily standardized in the way that they do it, but every county is billing cities, so there are lots of examples locally that we can look at too for that kind of funding model.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. One more call for any questions.
How does one raise their hand for that?
So on your screen, you should right above the shot box. You should be able to see an option that says Raise Hand.
What if you're on a telephone?
Oh, then go ahead and ask your question. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. So this is Brent Turner with California Association of Voting Officials. I was very glad to hear Pam from Verified acknowledge open source election systems and actually use the words open source rather than non-proprietary. But my question is, now that we've acknowledged that, in fact, open source technology seems to be the key to saving costs moving forward, wouldn't it be wise for some of the groups involved to give focus to moving forward, analyzing best methods for open source voting systems so that we can expedite that solution? There seems to have been a omission of this information previous for the last decade or so. And of course, we're very anxious now with San Francisco moving forward to expedite general public license open source systems.
Thanks, Brent. This is Pam. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Chris Jordanic might be on the call today, and he's from San Francisco County and has been a key mover on helping move this stuff forward in San Francisco. And maybe, if it's possible, Chris can email to our moderator the links to reports and proposals for San Francisco about this. I think that everyone's very interested to see what comes next out of San Francisco. You know, what we've been hearing around the country is that as jurisdictions like San Francisco and LA and Travis County and potentially others do sort of their own thing here, rather than just going to the proprietary marketplace that exists, that they're waiting to see what that looks like, and they're waiting with a lot of interest, and they're saying, you know, maybe we can't all build our own system, but we can benefit from others that are doing that and learn from what they're doing. So I think those reports and that
just a minute.
is going to be really useful from San Francisco.
You can use the bathroom.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brennan. Thank you, Pam. Anyone else on the line that isn't necessarily in front of the web option that has a question? No, and I don't see any hands raised up anymore, so I think that's probably it. Again, thank you so much for all our speakers and everyone that participated in the webinar today. Astrid, I'll send it over to you so you can do the close-up and then announce our next event.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciated our presenters this morning. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We are going to be hosting our next webinar this Thursday, May 12th at 2 p.m. Regarding the new proposals of registering to vote at the DMV. And this affects those folks that have already been registering over the last month or so and in time for the June primary. And so we want to make sure that people have the right information. And joining us for that panel, we're going to have Trudy Schaefer from the League of Women Voters, Lori Schellenberger from ACLU of California, Paul Spencer from Disability Rights California, and Ofelia Medina will also be joining us as a presenter for that. So thank you to our panel, to our moderator, and to everyone. Thank you. We look forward to having you join us at the next Democracy webinar for future California elections. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
That was the hardest thing to hear. And my garbage can needs to be emptied in there also. I think I missed last time. All right. I'll get out of your way. Off you get out of my way. We'll be out of each other's way together. There'll be a song and dance to follow. And thank you for cleaning the center. I've heard a number of compliments. And people just come in and go, oh my God, it's clean, it's brighter, you know, in a voice that fills up the room. And you're wondering, what did they think of it before? Thank you. I'm going to use the bathroom. I'll be right out. So, let me, sorry. I'm sorry. Shit. Sorry. That is quite all right. Yeah, I have that morning every day. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna, can we throw this out? I'll be out of your way. I can't believe I did that. No, don't worry about it. We got to make it. Why was it? Well, that's your fault. We don't have a job. Well, thank you. Let me get it right now. Let's go get my phone. I love these kinds of phone meetings because you don't have to go someplace again. All right, thank you. So,